Each year, far too many seamen lose their life on board Norwegian ships. Many others are injured, and several are severely disabled. We're going to look at accidents that have actually happened, and we ask, could these have been avoided if proper protective equipment had been used, if the safety regulations had been followed? But when there has been an accident, what happens? Let's begin with the procedure for a maritime inquiry. The report of the accident comes to the Maritime Directorate. This is distributed for the information of those responsible, as well as to the maritime investigator and the appropriate technical offices. The initial report is coded into the Directorate's data system. Later, the transcript of the inquiry and the investigator's account are also registered. The report is then filed in the Directorate's archives. Here in these files, we can find the full legal report of this accident. The ship was a cargo container ship of 9,400 gross registered tons, with a crew of 24. In September, the ship's at sea, not far off Barbados. It's an ordinary day with routine shipboard work. But in addition, the deep tanks in the ship's number 1 hold must be cleaned. At 8:30 in the morning, seamen A and B are told by the boatswain to open the manhole and prepare the safety equipment. On his own, Seaman A goes down into the tank without the safety gear. Seaman B warns against doing this. The moment Seaman A is on the floor of the tank, he calls that something is wrong and begins to climb the side ladder. Seaman A has almost come up. But then he falls back into the tank, a fall of 5 meters. Seaman B immediately alerts the boatswain and then reports to the skipper. The boatswain comes quickly to the hold. He dons the fresh air mask. However, the fastening that should hold the air hose secure to his belt so that the mask cannot be pushed away has been put on backwards. Nevertheless, he goes down without taking time to correct the error. The boatswain manages to fasten a safety belt onto Seaman A. But when he looks up for a line being paid out from the deck, his air mask is dislodged and he collapses in the tank. Shortly after, Seaman B goes down into the tank with a fresh air mask. He fastens lines to Seaman A and the boatswain. Both of them are hauled up on deck, and efforts to resuscitate them begin at once. The boatswain soon shows signs of life, but not Seaman A. The ship immediately sets course for the nearest harbour, which is in Trinidad. By radio, a rendezvous is arranged with a helicopter. After some hours, Seaman A and the boatswain are transferred to a hospital in Trinidad. Seaman A had died before the helicopter reached the ship. An autopsy revealed that the fall had fractured his skull, causing cranial bleeding, as well as several broken ribs, which had torn his lungs. The boatswain was declared fit after some days and returned to the ship. During the maritime inquiry, it became clear that there had been a series of violations of the applicable safety and security regulations. In the tank concerned, castor oil had previously been discharged in New York. After the discharging, the tank was filled with seawater, and this was pumped out just before the accident. The tank had not been aired, and no measurement was taken of possible poisonous gases or sufficient oxygen. And aboard the ship, there was no equipment to measure poisonous gases that can come from such cargo. Furthermore, the ship had no gas detector to measure the oxygen content of its tanks. The entrance to the tank had not been marked, either with a shield, sign or poster that could warn of the dangers waiting in the hold from poisonous gases and lack of oxygen. Furthermore, no care had been taken to see that Seaman A used a helmet. The fresh air mask the boatswain took was not in proper condition. The following safety equipment ought to have been in use. Seaman A with a work helmet and a proper fresh air mask. The entrance to the tank should have had a warning sign and a description of possible dangers. Measurements should have been taken of the tank's gas content as well as the oxygen level. This accident could have been avoided if the prescribed safety equipment had been used. It is the captain who has the overall responsibility on board ship. But you too are responsible. Next time you have to do such work, remember both safety equipment and the safety regulations. Here in the archives of the Maritime Directorate, we can find the Maritime Inquiry's report of this accident. The ship was a refrigerator container vessel of 274 gross tons with a crew of 5. In October, the ship was tied up in a harbour in Finland, discharging containers. The seaman had been told to paint the outboard side of the vessel astern. The mate helps with hanging a ladder, and he lowers the paint and paint roller. The rope line is already in place, and a dinghy has been brought aft. After lunch, the crew continues with the individual tasks they were given that morning. The captain has some administrative work to attend to in his cabin, and at the same time he must keep an eye on the discharging. He has to go back and forth. The mate must also see to the discharging. The deckhand has received provisions and is stowing them in place. The engineer is in the engine room doing maintenance work. The mate passes down the equipment and the seaman begins his task. The whole crew was occupied, each with his own work, and no one paid any attention to the seaman in the dinghy. An hour after the lunch break, the engineer comes up on deck and discovers the accident.
Okay, skifta till skeppet nu. Jag sticker bakom av er.
All efforts to revive the seaman were in vain. Could this accident have been avoided? Which safety measures should have been undertaken? The safety gear that should have been used includes protective shoes, gloves, life vest and helmet. But above all, there should have been a watch over the work the seaman was doing, or 2 men could have been put on the job. Furthermore, secured lifebuoys are required to be in the water both fore and aft. Perhaps this accident could have been avoided. The next time you must carry out such work, remember your protective gear and the safety instructions. We found the Maritime Inquiry's transcript of this accident here in the archives of the Maritime Directorate. The ship was a cargo container of 24,000 tons with a crew of 22 on board. Early in March, the ship was harboured in southern England. 8 o'clock in the morning, the ship's mechanics, A and B, were given orders to splice in new hoist lines for the radio antenna. This work was expected to take about half an hour. That same day, service had been ordered for the radar equipment. To replace the antenna's hoist lines, it was not necessary to climb up the radar mast, and therefore these two tasks appeared not to be connected. The two ship's mechanics started with shifting the antenna's hoist lines on the mast. Once this work was finished, it was okayed by the radio operator, shortly before 10 o'clock. The mechanics saw that the hoist lines for the radar mast were also in poor condition, and they decided to replace these. Once they began this work, they discovered that the fastenings for the hoist lines were inadequate, and that these should also be replaced. It was after the 10 o'clock coffee break that they started this work. Mechanic B climbs the radar mast to cut loose the fastening. He loses his grip on the hacksaw. It falls on the head of Seaman A. Fortunately, he just gets a cut in his head, and Seaman B continues the work. At 11:15, Seaman A hears a scream, and B falls from the mast. Seaman A immediately reports to the captain, who comes up to the steering house roof. The captain makes certain Seaman B is alive, and he summons an ambulance. The injured man is sent to the hospital. What could have been done to avoid this accident? When the job assignment was given to the ship's mechanics in the morning, there was no message that a radar technician was expected. Both the captain and the chief mate expected the work on the antenna's hoist lines to take about half an hour. It should have been finished by 10 o'clock. The captain was out on the wing of the bridge several times between 10 and 11 o'clock. He saw nobody working on the radar mast. Nor were the required warnings set out showing that work was being done on the radar or on the radar mast. This accident happened because Seaman A and B extended their work considerably. They discovered there was much more that needed to be replaced once they had started. And as good seamen, they felt the job was not done until everything was set right. But they should have contacted the chief mate or the one in charge at the time and have the job cleared. And the chief mate, on his part, should have checked whether the work was being done under safe conditions and made sure that safety equipment was being used. There's no question that the injury from the hacksaw could have been much reduced if a helmet had been used. And even the fall could have been avoided if a belt with a safety line and safety hook had been used. Perhaps this accident could have been completely avoided. The next time you have to carry out such work, remember to use protective gear and to follow the safety instructions. From the archive of the Maritime Directorate, we have the Maritime Inquiry's report of this accident. The ship was a chemical tanker of 17,000 gross tons with a crew of 26 on board. In September, the ship was harboured in the United States. The ship had discharged part of its cargo, formic acid, from the number 4 center tank. Cleaning of the tank began at 11 o'clock that same night. From 1:45 until 1:15, the tank was flushed with fresh water and then prepared to be aired at 1:30. The center tank was thus rinsed, the ejector was ready for the last of the water, and the blowers were started. From the storm bridge, the first mate and the boatswain see the chief mate go into the tank. Suddenly, they see the officer's arm reaching over the edge of the tank's hatch. He clearly has problems. They run and get hold of both of his wrists, but they cannot hold him. He is slippery with sweat. He falls to the second platform. The first mate and the boatswain both get their breathing apparatus and they go down into the tank. It is now 10 minutes since the officer fell. The first mate gives the chief mate air from his own air tank. He believes the man is alive and breathing. But then the first mate begins to have problems of his own.